Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figure It Out cast for January 2023. Got to get used to the new date. As always, I am your host, Adam Koralik, here to talk about all sorts of subjects. We got video game stuff, we got entertainment stuff, all-purpose nerdery. This month, as always, this is a Patreon-backed podcast, so I appreciate your support. If you want to get access to this early or any of my videos early, there's a link in the description. You can sign up, or you can just listen to this casually just for your own entertainment. If you do sign up, though, you can get early access to benefits, you can pick subjects, you can get shout-outs, and you can even be on the podcast. And speaking of which, Abdullah, welcome back.
Hello, happy to be back as usual.
Well, happy as always to have you here, man. So, were you here last month? It's been such a blur.
I don't think so. December? I don't think so.
Yeah, I apologize that I can't remember that. It's like, so, for everybody...
I don't even remember.
Yeah, last month was just... So you have to understand, December is insane for everybody on YouTube because we have to make like 10 times as many videos as we normally would because we essentially don't get paid for January. So you have to make like all your money in December to get through until February. So it's just a constant stream of videos. So it's like this channel, I put out like, I don't even know, like 10 videos for the month, and then on the other channel, Flying and Eating, I put out like 7. So it's just like a constant stream of content. But hopefully you guys enjoyed it out there if you're listening. So let's hopefully everybody had a nice holiday and a happy new year and all that sort of stuff. So are you ready, man? You want to get into subjects here?
Alright, let's go.
Alright, and as a reminder to anybody listening, if you want to click around to different subjects, there's always timecode in the description so that you can do that. The first one up, Abdullah, you picked this, and we can basically, we'll set up the subject, and then I guess we should explain what inspired this. But you wanted to talk about the concept of collecting tactics for regional exclusives. Do you want me to elaborate on that, or do you want to do it?
Maybe you can elaborate on that?
Okay, so over the years, if you guys have been watching my channel, you notice that I like to pick up games not just from my own country, but, games that exclusively came out in other countries, especially when I have a passion for that system. Like, for example, I got a full Dreamcast set, and when I say full, I've got all the American stuff, but I also have all the games that only came out in Europe, and I have all the games that only came out in Japan. And so I like to do that with a lot of different platforms because I find it interesting. And you wanted to talk about some of the, I guess you would call them the shopping tactics for how best to get those things for, I guess, less money than otherwise with the cheating, or not cheating, but the easy route should be something like just going to eBay and paying a guy a lot of money to do it for you, right?
Yeah, that's probably it's not like it's frowned upon, but it's frowned upon if you think it's the first way. It was interesting to note that sometimes, one thing is that before, I would say the 2010s, I guess, most of the games were just, at least given from my perspective or what I have here in my country, is that most games were always imported. That is, everything we have is imported. So, for example, when you think of it from your perspective, usually you will differentiate whether something is imported or local. But for us, technically, everything was imported.
We should probably specify, just for anybody who potentially is new, Abdullah lives in the UAE. So, video games-wise, the 3 major regions have always been the United States, kind of with Canada attached, Europe is just kind of a general entity, and then Japan, which tends to represent all of Asia, even though that's not really fair, but that's, video game-wise, is typically how it's broken up. I assume you agree with that?
Yes, that's the consensus, I would say.
Okay.
And no one disagrees with that. So for us, usually it was one of those. So it's either going to be a PAL region game or it's going to be North American. And from what I've noticed, at least from my personal experience, perhaps people had other experiences, there are shops that most commonly you would find PAL region games, but there were some places that had North American games. Those small shops usually had them. Some retail places had them, but the most common thing is PAL region games. And so for us, it was always like that. So, but with time, as time went forward, let's just say globalization, or video games becoming more and more out there, we've received a lot of. We've been getting our own semi-region, I would say. So we would get ratings that have our label on them. We would Arabic on them. We had games that have been dubbed in Arabic, and even game covers have been changed. And you know, we've had our own sort of manufacturers. Obviously, the game still is within the context of those three regions. However, it just creates way more variance, and to the casual player, I don't think this matters. But for the collector, it does.
I don't even remember the name of the game, which is a little embarrassing. But so where this all culminates is that a buddy of mine, shout out to a guy named Kyle, he's super into collecting the PS4, kind of like the way I collect or did collect the Dreamcast. Like, I don't know anybody who has a PS4 collection like this dude. I've been to his house. He's got tubs and tubs of just PS4 games, and like ones you have never heard of, because the PS4 has a stunning amount of regional exclusives with low print runs. Stuff that's exclusive to Hong Kong, stuff that's exclusive to Spain, just these random one-offs. I'm not even talking about just like limited run games or whatever. I'm talking about like, hey, a publisher got behind this game and they only put it out in like very low print run in one country. Not even things like Revenge of the Bird King. Like, the thing is, these are games you have never heard of. So he randomly texts me and shows me this photo of a PS4 game that I was convinced was a meme. I did not believe that this game was real. Did I send you a photo of it?
Yeah, you sent me a link of it, and yeah, it's called Arab Drift Cars.
Arab Drift Cars. That's what it's called. So my friend Kyle sent me a photo of that. And I was like, oh, this seems like a fake meme, like that borders on possibly being racist. Like, I didn't know what to think of this. And I just thought he was like sending me a joke. And then he was like, oh, no, dude, this is a real game. And I was like, what do you mean it's real? He's like, Google it. And I did. And he was right. So this game, I guess he said that it primarily came out only actually in the UAE. So I was like, he was like, if you can find a way to get it, you should. And I was looking online, and eBay copies are all like, as you can see in this link that I've got, is like $200 USD plus. And I was like, man, and then I thought of you. I was like, oh, wait a minute, Abdullah lives in the UAE. Maybe he's got a shot at it. So I asked you, and I'll let you take over from here.
So here's what happened. So when you mentioned it to me, I thought similar to you, that this was some sort of maybe like fan-made game or something, but it turned out to be that it's an actually published game, which was crazy to think about.
It really is. When you look at that cover art, you're just like, there's no way this is real.
Yes, given everything that you find, is like, well, something's wrong here probably. But I was surprised to hear about it. So I tried tracking it down using the regular shops here, and I'm not gonna mention the name of every shop. So I just tried to track it down, but I couldn't get anywhere. So I reached out to my buddy Sayed, who from the shop I mentioned before, the shop I go to most of the time. It's the guy that sells retro games here mostly, so Gamer Squad. So I contacted him. I told him, hey, is there any chance that you can track down this game, that we can find it somewhere? And he opened it up and he said, yeah, I mean, I've received a couple of copies before for it, and he did have some access to it. And so that's where things started. So we were able to manage some copies of the game, and it was not as expensive as in eBay.
Yeah, didn't you say it was like a $20 or $30 USD game?
Somewhat like that. So that's well, it's retail. I would say it's retail.
Okay.
But because he had previous stock of it, so he had the ability to just lower the price a little bit for it.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, even if it is $20 or $30 game, right now. It really depends on where you get it from. So if you get it, so even retail is like how much, like $45 or something.
I have no idea what that game would cost retail, man. Like until you found it, I was almost convinced it was just a meme. You know what I mean?
Yeah, somewhere in the somewhere in the 40s to 50 maybe dollar range, something like that. I can't really recall the conversion factor, but that doesn't matter. I found it for relatively cheap at that point of time, and due to just previous stock being available. However, I was still unsure whether the game was there or not. I told him, "Are you sure you can get it or not?" And he said, "Don't worry, I'll track it down." And he has resources. So eventually, yeah, we got copies of the game, and at a price way lower than what you have paid on eBay. Probably with what you paid on eBay, you could get like 6 copies maybe. So I asked my buddy, and he said, from what he remembers, is that it was developed in Saudi Arabia. And I don't think we need to explain what it's similar to.
No, I mean just by looking at it.
Yeah, you can clearly make it out. Like what that's about.
I'm going to read the description on the back of the box because it's very short, but this is what it says. Quote, "Start playing the Arab style in the open world. You can play in offline mode, and you can explore, drift, race, and much more." That is the entire description of the game.
Yep. That's pretty much it. But I actually haven't tried playing it yet.
Well, I don't blame my favorite part, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the box art. It has a PS5 upgrade available. Like, why would you bother?
Well, I mean, what I found out, this is all I could get about the game.
Yeah.
And that's what sparked the question. I mean, locally, you could get it, like, I got it at a regular price. I didn't pay, I mean, if I were to be selling it to somebody outside, I mean, I can understand the point of view of the number that these people are selling it for on eBay, but, I mean, unless you're a serious collector or you want to just save some time, not money, save time, you can get it on eBay. But if you just track it down a little, I mean, it won't be an issue whatsoever.
Yeah, right? That's exactly. So that's basically where we're trying to go with all this. So the reason we told you this whole story is it's about collecting tactics. Like, what kind of tricks and things can you use if you want to collect? Granted, this is not a good game. It's just an example of an idea you could, pursue to get something obscure like this from another part of the world.
See the number, the drastic number you could have saved if you just try to networking.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I'm going with this. The two best ways, honestly, to get games from other countries while saving yourself some money. The first is the most obvious way, is to actually go to these places and get them yourself. Now, I realize for a lot of people that's not accessible, and some would even argue, well, that doesn't financially work because you pay to fly, you pay to stay. I mean, as someone who flies a lot, trust me, that part isn't true either. It's very easy to fly. If you're an American, it's very easy to fly without really paying any money for it, but that's a different discussion. I talk about that all the time in my Discord, by the way. But let's assume, for argument's sake, you're going to a place anyway. Let's say you're into collecting Japanese games or whatever. Just get them when you actually go to Japan. Like, you'll have a much easier time getting them that way.
You'll save a lot of money on those imports that you might use. There are import stores, if I'm not mistaken. You guys have dedicated stores for imports from Japan, right?
Right. They exist all over the place, but you're going to pay a premium.
Yeah, that's the thing you're trying to avoid, especially if it's a rare game. I can imagine the premium being even higher.
Yeah, I tell people this all the time especially with Japanese stuff. Like, people like to... All right, so the common thing people do is they'll look at a game. I'm going to use the gold standard of expensive games, but Panzer Dragoon Saga on the Sega Saturn, the American copy, you're lucky if you can get it for $1,000. It's like a $1,500 game. People don't want to pay that, obviously. So
that's you're talking about the regular game, not graded or anything.
Correct.
Like
just a nice complete edition of the game. So people don't want to pay that, obviously. So what they'll do is they'll typically buy the Japanese version, which is much, much cheaper. So maybe they'll look on eBay and be like, well, $100 or whatever for the Japanese copy. That's a much better deal. I can just play it with a strategy guide and get along. The thing is, if it's $100 on eBay, it's probably like $10 in Japan. So if you, so you're saving, like, if you do that enough times, it easily justifies actually going there. Again, and I maintain this, hotels and things in Japan are very cheap. If you have friends there, it's even cheaper. If you know how to play the frequent flyer miles game, you don't. Do you know how much it cost me to go to Japan? Do you want to know?
How much?
I can get there round trip directly from Chicago to for $5. That's all it costs.
Once you play those games you talked about.
Yes, once you essentially invest in things like airline miles and you figure out how that all works, which I constantly give advice about again in my Discord, it only cost me $5 to do a round trip. Yeah, I can swing that. That's less than the cost of shipping a single game. That's insane. So once you can go there...
That's nothing.
Yeah, I know. You go there, and then you can just fill your bag up with whatever you want. It's a very doable thing. It's just that people think it's not because no one knows how to start that process. This is why I try to give people advice about that. That's not really the point. The point is, obviously, if you ever go to a place, it's much easier to acquire the games. Whether it's Japan, it's parts of Europe, or in this case, the UAE, you can track it down yourself. Now, obviously, not everybody's going to get on board with that plan. So the secondary plan, which is much more realistic for a lot of people, is networking, as you just said. Again, we have a whole community in the Discord of people who are from countries all over the world. Cool people that are all into retro games and collecting and all that, who are very willing to help each other out. Like, we got people from Ireland, so there's a couple of Irish exclusives. You want them? Find one of our Irish guys. Ask them if they'll track it down for you. Pay them to do it. Send it along your way. You're going to pay a little more than it would cost in a store in Ireland because you have to pay for shipping and potentially just kick them a couple bucks for their time, whatever it is. But that's going to be way better than what it costs to buy you from some guy on eBay who's just trying to sell it to you. Networking, making friends. Stores. Yeah, so like Abdullah here did me a huge solid by actually tracking this down. I actually, the only reason I wanted it is because it's so bizarre. It's not like I have any desire to actually sit down and play Arab Drift Cars 1, which I'm sure is a horrendous game. But the fact that you were able to find it for like $20-$30 and no one has to pay this ridiculous $220 premium, that is what networking is, and that is a great way to buy those regional exclusives, is make buddies. And we live in the internet era. You can do this very easily. And if you don't even know where to start with that, that's my suggestion. If you're actually a listener of this channel, go into my Discord, join it. It's totally free. You can socialize with people. We go out of our way to make sure we know which country everybody's from, because it helps ensure like that sort of cross connection. And I mean, we've set up a really cool network in there where a lot of people are like, hey man, I'm visiting, Japan. Does anybody from Japan live here? And we got a couple people in Japan. They're like, yeah, I'd love to be your tour guide. It's a thing. It's not that hard to get around and to get games on the cheap if you are willing to socialize a little bit.
That's exactly, and that's usually even something they give to people who want to find jobs. They said, well, networking, that's the first thing you do whenever you want to find a job. So it works even in this sector. And what's interesting is that even when you mention networking, you mention it internationally. There's also internal networking, like what you did with me. That was international, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I did with my buddy is local networking as well. So when you get to know game store owners as well, it can be pretty helpful. So when he said something like, well, okay, I just have some old stock, I need to just get rid of it. So, I mean, you could also get things for cheaper if you just find those, old stocks and whatever of games. It could also be helpful, such kind of networking as well, getting to know game store owners personally. Not just being a customer, it also works out for you. Might not work a lot of the time, especially with retail stores, but it works with those independent stores.
Yep, I agree completely. So, unless you have anything else to offer on this, I think we've kind of set our piece.
No, but I think we covered everything, right?
I think so. Okay, all right, we'll move on to the next subject. Abdullah, thank you for picking that one. So the next one comes up from two people, sort of. So one of the Patreon tiers that you can have is you can pick your own subject. And we had a couple people who did that, and we had a couple people who were eligible to do that. Chuck Shaw was eligible to do that, but he told me straight up, I don't have any ideas this month. So we're just going to kind of roll this into another one. So this is a shout out to Chuck Shaw. But another member who did have that option and chose to exercise it was Samuel Coxus. And what he wanted to talk about, so this is going to be for both of them, was emulating games on the Dreamcast. And let me elaborate by what I mean by that. We're not talking about the idea of playing Dreamcast games on a PC through emulation or anything like that. We're talking about the reverse, where you can play games for other systems on the Sega Dreamcast. This is more of a... I would have said, if it weren't for something that happened very recently, I would have said this was more of a historically interesting subject, because back in the day when the Dreamcast was more relevant and it was the Mill CD exploit was cracked, people basically figured out you could start writing software for the Dreamcast. And one of the most popular things to try and write was various console emulators to run games on the Dreamcast, say your Sega Genesis, your Super Nintendo, your NES, what have you. And now each one had varying degrees of success. But I would argue that mostly as the Dreamcast aged, there was less of a reason to keep updating this when you had not only other consoles that could do it better, things like at the time the OG Xbox, but of course everybody who wants to emulate stuff does it on PC now. Or we even have like official emulator type of products that come out from companies like Nintendo has their own Switch Online service that has N64 support and all that sort of stuff. I would say that the desire to really make it run kind of faded away. But I'm going to give props to a very recent release because I think it's really cool. I don't know if you heard about this. Are you familiar with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection for the Xbox, PS5, and so on?
No, not really. I'm not a big fan of...
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. But I'm sure a lot of people who are listening have played it and know what it is. So Konami put out this set that basically contained a bunch of the 80s and the 90s like Ninja Turtles games, some of the arcade games, the Genesis stuff, the NES stuff,
was this one a recent release?
Yes.
If so, then I've probably heard of it, but not.
Yeah, it came out like, I don't know, 6 months ago. Maybe not even that long ago. Maybe like 3 months ago. It hasn't been that long. So it came out. And it did pretty well. But there was this guy, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't remember his name, who is big. He's passionate about the Dreamcast, such as myself. And he's also very good with programming. So he decided to actually make what he called the definitive edition of the Cowabunga collection for the Sega Dreamcast. Because essentially, all Konami did was take all these like ROMs from that era and then just build emulators around them to run on, modern hardware. So since the same Sega Genesis game already existed, he was able to just put that on a Dreamcast emulator, or for a Genesis emulator for the Dreamcast, and then run it in that collection, along with a bunch of other stuff. So it's, it's free. You can download it. Anybody can try it. So I did. His release has some pluses and some minuses. Obviously, it doesn't include the original arcade versions that the official collection does, but it does include stuff the official collection could never have. Like, he used some ROM hacks, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Streets of Rage. He also used the Beats of Rage engine to make like the definitive edition of Hyperstone Heist. That's apparently on there. He's also got like bonus videos of entire episodes of Ninja Turtles, as well as some music videos of Ninja Turtles. All that kind of stuff is on there. I actually sat there and I played it for a while. I will say the most interesting thing about it is the fact that he even got it done from a technical perspective, and he did everything he could to optimize some of the games. But I don't really think I would call it the definitive edition of that same collection. It's just that it has some stuff for licensing reasons that the official collection couldn't do. But I guess where I'm going with all this, since we are talking about games being emulated on the Dreamcast, it is neat to see that someone still put the effort in to actually kind of get that working, even if it didn't have much of a point beyond just kind of the novelty of it. So did you ever actually use the Dreamcast with emulation at all?
No, actually. Dreamcast is one of those consoles that's pretty loud, I guess. Oh, I'm sure. I'm pretty sure you know that. It's pretty loud console, so mostly what I do with it is just I play a little bit And the furthest thing I've done with Dreamcast is probably use that VGA adapter. That's pretty much the furthest thing I've done. I'm more into the collecting side of Dreamcast than the playing it side.
That's fine. I mean,
honestly speaking, I love the Dreamcast, but it's pretty annoying when you click it on.
Well, okay, so I understand that because of the ages we grew up in. Like, you're substantially younger than me. So when I was a kid...
So funny enough, I grew up with the GameCube, so I'm a little short on that.
So where I'm going with that is basically, like, when I was a kid, I mean, when I was a little kid, I obviously had access to the Genesis and the SNES and all that, like, originally. But when the Dreamcast emulator scene kind of came into its being, it was a very interesting thing for people of my age range to check out, because even though I had kept all my consoles, the idea that, like, I had this disc that had, like, all my favorite Sega Genesis games all just running at once on the Dreamcast was really cool. And as a kid, I was less observant of its issues, because like, Super Nintendo games would only run at, like, 70 to 80% speed, so they weren't...
Yeah, but at that age, you don't care about those things, right? You just care about, oh my god, I can play it.
Well, in some cases, yes. Like, I found the SNES kind of unplayable. Like, the Genesis ran really well, but that's because it was, like, basically a stolen emulator that Sega themselves made for the Sega Smash Pack collection. But the issue was the sound was never correct. And I have to admit, I think that's, like, I was playing this collection, the Ninja Turtles collection, and I was running, I think it was the Streets of Rage Ninja Turtles game. And the sound, I had to, like, turn it almost off, because at times it made my ears want to bleed. And it was like, this is the same issue that's existed on that emulator for, like, 20 plus years. But it was kind of a little bit of a nostalgic throwback in that sense. The Dreamcast emulation scene, I feel like, could have gotten a lot further, but it just kind of never really needed to, because the technology got antiquated. I think the most interesting element of all of it is the Bleemcast story. Are you familiar with this at all?
The Bleem?
Bleemcast. Have you ever heard of that?
Nope.
All right, so let me tell you the truncated version of this, because I think this is the most definitive Dreamcast emulation story that ever happened. There was a company in the 90s called Bleem, Bleem. And what they did was they were headed up by a guy named Randy Linden. And he basically found passion in the idea of bringing PlayStation 1 games over to the PC through emulation. So they actually created this software called Bleem, and they released it officially. There was a boot disk, an install disk, whatever. And you would actually be able to run PS1 games. The problem was that it was kind of buggy, but emulators, late 90s, when the PS1 was relevant, it was still Sony's actual, like, dominant console. That was kind of a big deal, and people were willing to forgive some of the bugs. So, seeing opportunity in this, as well as seeing the option to basically develop for the Dreamcast in an unlicensed manner, Randy Linden and Bleem decided to make a version of that same software for the Dreamcast called Bleemcast, Bleemcast. The original idea was they were going to do these disc packs. I think they were developing 4 of them. And so each disc you would buy would include a single disc that supported 100 PS1 games. It would have, like, a very specific list. And so if you had this disc, you would put it in, boot it up on the Dreamcast, and then at the appropriate time when it's like, hey, take the disc out, you then put in the PS1 game that is compatible, close the disc lid, the Dreamcast boots it up, and you're playing that PS1 game on the Dreamcast. Not only is it working...
So essentially, like, some sort of volumes, you're saying, right?
Yes.
It's a disc, so.
That was the idea. Not only is it working at that point, but it's also got all the visual benefits that come with running on the Dreamcast and via emulation. So it would actually load faster. The resolution, because the PS1 ran at, I think it was 240p, but the Dreamcast could upscale and enhance the content to 480p, making a very nice, much nicer picture. It also had, I don't remember if it would be technically anti-aliasing or not, but it was actually able to do some measure of buffing out of the image to make for lack of a better way of explaining it, the graphics looked better. They would run better, it would look nicer, etc. It would just, then of course you could also have the benefit of theoretically, not having to own a Sony PlayStation, you could own a Sega Dreamcast and still play some of the biggest original PlayStation hits. That was kind of the logic. As they were going through this process more and more, naturally Sony did not like that they were doing this, so Sony kept throwing everything at them legally they could to try and stop them. But Sony didn't actually have a case because Bleem never broke the law. They weren't actually stealing any proprietary Sony content, but they could throw them into legal hurdles long enough to kind of drain them of their funding. So eventually, through all this bug testing, Bleem figured out that the idea of doing 4 volumes, each one supporting 100 games, wasn't going to work because there were too many variables and too many games would have issues. And while PC gamers would have been more willing to tolerate that kind of thing, console gamers kind of, at least at the time, really expected the game to work perfectly because there was no updating it ever. And so they were basically like, okay, that plan won't work. So what we'll do is a 1 game at a time plan. And the logic was, we will build one specific disc that covers exactly 1 game. The first one they ever released was Gran Turismo 2, which was a boot disc specifically for that game. And it was essentially fully mastered. It was almost flawless. And they released it exclusively through EB Games at the time because basically Sony went to every single retailer and threatened them not to carry Bleemcast no matter what. And EB Games was the only one that fought back and said, if you ever threaten us again like this, we will never carry PlayStation inventory for the rest of our existence. And that was a pretty bold move. And as a result, they had no choice but to stop it because that was such a major retailer for Sony. So they sold Bleemcast Gran Turismo 2 discs, and what happened was you had to buy that disc. You also had to buy the actual game, and that was the part that got, kind of missed. It wasn't like they were selling you an illegitimate copy of the game. You still had to go buy Sony's actual copy of the game. And then
very good technicality.
It really was. It was one that kept them legally safe. There's actually some irony to it. Bleemcast was technically capable of running burned copies of those same games. And the only reason it could do that is because the only thing that distinguishes a PS1 original disc from a burned disc is what's called a wobble. It's basically a defect that exists in the disc pressing format, like when that's happening, that physical defect that exists on the disc is unique to the machines Sony was using to press the disc. So when Sony realized that was going to be in all their games, that's how they built their copy protection. Basically, the PlayStation hardware is actually intentionally looking for a defect. But because burned discs were manufactured by other means, they would not have that defect. Thus, the PlayStation would know whether or not the disc is legitimate or not. So when it came to the Bleemcast process, the only way that Bleem could have gone in and actually prevented it from playing burned copies was to steal Sony's IP specifically. They had a specific file in there that Sony owned that they could have used, put into the software and said, you have to detect this, otherwise it won't work. But if Bleem had included that, then Bleem actually would have broken the law because that was a wholly owned file that Sony gave no consent to use. Thus, by leaving that file out, they didn't break the law, but at the same time allowed the disc to play unlicensed versions of the game. As ironic as that
Fair
sounds. Game. Isn't that confusing? It's confusing a little bit, but that's basically what happened.
It's confusing, but it worked for the best.
It's fascinating, yeah. So the Gran Turismo 2 sold decently enough that they were able to release 2 more. They did Tekken 3, and then, in my opinion, their best one, Metal Gear Solid. So you can actually play Metal Gear Solid, the PS1 game, on the Dreamcast with that, and it runs like flawlessly. It actually runs much better than it does on PS1, on PS2, and even on PS3, which is stunning. And since that game has never been remastered properly, it's only been remade, like with Twin Snakes, it is debatable that that's still the definitive edition of that game, as crazy as that is. That was their biggest success story. So after that, they had actually planned a few others. I know Final Fantasy VII was basically done. WWF SmackDown was basically done. But they ended up not getting released because Sony just continued to hammer Bleem with, like, basically fake litigation just to tie them up in courts so that, I mean, they were a small company run by like 4 guys. So they were spending all their money on legal fees. They always won their cases, but they had no money. And eventually they just kind of had to declare bankruptcy. The deal that was struck in the end was that Sony would agree to pay for all of Bleem's legal fees, and in exchange, Bleem had to completely cease developing anything for PlayStation software any further, unless it was for Sony specifically, which, as I understand it, Rand Linden, I think, did at least briefly work at Sony for a time in the PS2 era, but I'm not 100% on that. But that's probably the most infamous Dreamcast emulation story, and it always left me with a sour taste in my mouth about like that whole process, because like Sony basically just going out of their way to kill a little guy who wasn't breaking the law. And even still was generating revenue for Sony because people would have to buy their games for this anyway. That really upset me. But at the same time, it is funny if you go back to that era, those same discs were not licensed by Sega at all. But if you can actually read this when you boot up Bleemcast, it has this whole like big legal explanation. It actually straight up says that this is not authorized by Sega. However, they're far nicer about it than other companies such as Sony or something to that effect. And all that really happened, my understanding of that situation was, so Bleem actually went to Sega looking for official licensing and for them to get on board. And Sega's position was, we cannot get involved in this because of the nature of emulation. And you're essentially, even though you're legally doing it, you are crossing some lines when it comes to taking content from Sony. So we can't put our name on this. But if you make it on your own, you self-publish and all that, we'll look the other way. And that, interestingly, that model was kind of the foundation of the Dreamcast independent scene. To this day, Sega does not authorize or allow officially or get involved with the Dreamcast independent scene. You know, people making games, publishing them on discs, and selling them for the Dreamcast. But at the same time, not once have they ever gone after anybody and tried to stop them from releasing a game.
That's actually pretty nice. Imagine if it was like Nintendo or something.
Oh yeah, Nintendo will sue you into the ground for celebrating their history.
Yeah.
But you know,
yeah, I love Nintendo, but that's the reality.
Yeah, it really is. So anyway, that's my big emulating games on Dreamcast story that I can think of is really just the Bleemcast story, because outside of that, I mean, that scene, outside of this one Ninja Turtles release, which was just a throwback in multiple ways, I don't think there's any real activity over there anymore. I remember there was a time where people were really trying pretty significantly to get different, systems to run on it. PS1 emulation outside of Bleemcast got somewhere, but nothing really impressive. Super Nintendo was never even really worked out. The problem was always the RAM was too small, because I think the RAM on the Dreamcast is like 16 megabytes, and you have to house an entire game in that memory when it's through emulation. So NES games were not a big deal. Even Genesis games typically weren't a big deal. But SNES games, it got a little too complex for it to not only run, but run and have enough resources left for it to run stable. Because it's not doing a constant stream of data. It's basically just all of it's just stored in the memory. In fact, if you ever boot up one of those discs and actually load up a ROM, after it loads, you can just take the disc out. It doesn't even need the disc anymore. It's just sitting there running the entire game off the ROM. So bigger systems, like there was some effort to get some of the GBA stuff to work, but only like the smallest things would have. And disc-based emulation was always more interesting because it didn't suffer from that problem. And I think the best one that we actually do see some official quote-unquote activity out of still is the Neo Geo CD emulator for the Dreamcast, Neo for All. That actually was built, it actually runs games on the Dreamcast for the Neo Geo CD better than the Neo Geo CD hardware does, just because it doesn't suffer from the load times limitation. And it's allowed a constant stream of data, so that's pretty nice. And a few of them were actually licensed by companies like Visco, for example, made a game called Breakers for the Neo Geo CD. They did a deal with Josh Prod at the Dreamcast independent scene, and they did an official release for the Dreamcast using that emulator. So it's not completely dead, but I don't know what else will ever really come of it. I don't think anybody has the curiosity anymore to really try to make like the N64 work flawlessly on the Dreamcast, assuming it would even be possible. I think the only game anybody ever got to work even slightly, was Super Mario 64, because that was only like an 8 megabyte game, so it was actually surprisingly possible. But even then, it didn't run all that well, which is not that surprising. I think there's an open source version of that now that's far better than the emulated version, but that is a different discussion for another time. But yeah, I guess that'll do it for this particular subject, unless you have anything else to say.
All good.
All right, man. Well, then, thank you very much for joining me, Abdullah, and it's always a pleasure to have you. So now we have a round of shout-outs. The following people are all Patreon backers, and they are at the tier in which they get a shout-out. We've got Tim Inman, Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, and Trey Wagner. Once again, that is Tim Inman, Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, and Trey Wagner. Thank you so much for your support, everybody. We couldn't do this without you. I know I couldn't run the channel without you, so I appreciate you guys. Also, welcome back. We got Joseph. What's up, man?
Hey, Adam. It's good to be here.
By the way, I probably should have mentioned this earlier. Yeah, obviously Rob isn't here. There's probably some conspiracy theory forming about that, but no, it's just been always scheduling conflicts. So at the time we're recording this, it's a weekday. I'm going to be out of town for a few weeks. So I was like, if this is January's even going to have an episode, then we got to record it at the tail end of December. So yeah, Rob just couldn't do it today because he's not really available on weekdays. So he's fine. Everything's fine. It's just always been a terrible timing issue. But anyway, so with that out of the way, do you want to get started on our first subject here?
Sounds good.
All right, so you didn't actually have a subject, but that's okay because we had a few different backers that came up with some stuff. So here's what we're going to be doing. The first one up, which I'm going to sort of credit you with, but really this comes from Spencer Puryear. He wanted us to talk specifically about online dependent games and what do we think of them. He actually had cited MMOs and saying goodbye to them when they shut down. Do you have any feelings on that?
I don't like them. They are bad. I don't like them at all.
The idea of games shutting down, or MMOs specifically?
Basically, yeah. It's one thing for, a game that's, mainly an online game, but does have single-player stuff. It's another for, it's just, literally, just online, and once the servers go down, that's it, the game's dead.
Yeah, I've always kind of had an extreme thought process on this, which was back in the day, you'd have to be this is what I used to think. You'd have to be kind of an idiot to get invested in an online-only game, because as soon as that, the servers are dead, then your game is dead forever and is totally unrevisitable outside of, fandom efforts, which will never quite be as good as, a legitimate effort. Now, I still think that, but in a much lighter way. I still think you're kind of silly if you're going to get invested in that, knowing that. The problem is, I think there's a lot of people that don't know that. I come from the last generation that grew up without the internet, so we kind of understand what it was like to live in a time where that didn't exist and how easily that can go away on something. I would argue a lot of Gen Z kids and the next generation, the kids of the millennials, which I don't even think they have a name yet, I think they're going to have a rough awakening whenever they find out stuff doesn't stay online forever. And that... I am genuinely curious what that will produce, though. This is kind of a different subject, though, but, I've said it before in the past. We're the nostalgia generation. We're constantly bringing back, the millennials are constantly bringing back the 90s and the 80s and all that stuff. How do you bring back what they're growing up on when it's entirely server-based and can't exist anymore?
Well,
do you know what I'm saying?
That depends on how the thing is set up. Older online focused shooters like Quake, Unreal, and stuff like that. I'm speaking very generally here because I was never even part of those back when, for the most part, when they were going up, when they were around. They had the ability for people to put up their own dedicated servers. In theory, even if the main servers go down and the game's not supported anymore, games like that, or games that are set up like that, you can keep playing them forever as long as there's enough of a fan base to keep servers online.
Are you talking about peer-to-peer stuff?
Well, no. This is actually different from peer-to-peer. Someone actually paying to have a server up and set up for the game. Yeah, the peer-to-peer stuff is... In theory, you would think that would allow the game to go on forever, but that's how most of the matchmaking stuff in online shooters on consoles work, and in fighting games, and that those go down and stop working. Yeah.
So my opinion on this now is basically have your fun, but just understand that you're entering into a game that is temporary. outside of these fan efforts. And I don't know. I never got the idea of getting super invested into this, but that's just me. And I guess really all you can say about this is "told you so." Like when this kind of thing happens.
Yeah, like I've never been much of a multiplayer gamer to begin with. I mean, obviously, like growing up, like when I had friends over, we'd play like Mario Kart or a fighting game or whatever. But or when they brought their Xbox over, Halo. But like I was never like someone who was like super into multiplayer games myself. Like almost every game that I actually play by myself on my own time, for the most part, is a single player game. There are a couple of exceptions, but like sometimes like one of my friends wants to play like Deep Rock Galactic or something like that, and I'll hop on and play a bit. Mm-hmm. But like, and then there was one time a group of my friends actually did like a Civ 6 multiplayer game, which was fun. But generally, I'll stick to single player modes in most cases. Like even for like things like Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 3, yeah, I'll dabble in the multiplayer modes, but I'm basically buying those mostly because well, I want to experience them, and also because they do have single player modes that I play. Which, speaking of, I need to get back to Splatoon 3. So I kind of dropped off that one.
Yeah, I'm in kind of the same boat. Like, I have nothing fundamentally against multiplayer. I'm just not a very competitive person, so I don't really get any enjoyment out of that. It's very rare. I occasionally enjoy some co-op on something, but even that is not too common. But in those situations, I never personally get too invested in any sort of multiplayer game for basically those two reasons combined, which is, I don't really enjoy it all that much, and I know that it's a temporary thing. So, I feel for people that don't understand that it's temporary. It's one thing if you're like, hey man, I just want to play a game while it's relevant. I'm enjoying it. I know it's not going to be around forever. That's fine. Enjoy a game any way you like to enjoy a game. I got nothing against that. I mostly just feel bad for the people who think that, especially younger people, who think that these games are just always going to exist as a service when they won't. And so, yeah, there's really no solution to this outside of the fandom sort of trying to handle it, but even that will never be as good. But right. It's the way of things, man. Like, not every game maintains its popularity, but at least with offline single player content, you have the choice to revisit it on your own. Whereas something that was utterly online dependent, it doesn't matter if you did everything right, that game is going to be taken from you. And I still have an issue with that, but, if you enter into it knowing that and being okay with it, that's your choice.
And speaking of games being taken away from you, there's something that happened that I found out about recently that I'm surprised we never actually thought to cover, like, back when it happened. So you're familiar enough with Overwatch to know that it exists and that Overwatch 2 is out, right?
I know that it exists, and I know that Overwatch 2 was out, yes.
Yeah. So you want to know what happened when Activision Blizzard released Overwatch 2?
By all means.
They completely overwrote everyone's files for Overwatch 1 to turn it into Overwatch 2. Unless if you pirate Overwatch 1 now, if there was even any way to pirate it, you cannot play the original version of the game that you paid for. Because now it's Overwatch 2.
Yeah, see, I had never heard that. Obviously, I find that sort of practice to be horrific.
Yeah.
But, see, that's the thing, though. Like, when you invest in a game like that, which is, a game entirely dependent upon its online functionality, you have to go into it knowing that you're essentially foregoing a lot of your rights. But at the same time, I would argue if you understand that and still proceed, that's your choice. Knowing full well this is I guess I look at it like, I kind of look at it like if you were to buy a ticket to a sporting event. Like, the ticket might have been expensive, it got you in the door, you got to enjoy that event, and then the event ended. You're not entitled to a refund. You're not entitled to constantly go back to the event because the event is over, and that's kind of it. You understood that when you bought the ticket, that you weren't just going to be able to go there forever and do whatever you want. But that's online gaming. What's weird is when you find somebody who doesn't understand that their one ticket doesn't automatically get them into everything. And I feel like that is kind of what some online games are like, especially with younger people, where they just have this expectation that it always will function.
Yeah.
And no matter how many examples we see of that never being the case, it doesn't seem that that lesson is ever learned. You know, we complain about it, we understand the problem, but we support it financially anyway. So there's no incentive for them to change that either.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, there really isn't. Like, once a bunch of people started playing MMOs, I mean, that was basically it. That was basically it as far as this is concerned. Like, once we proved that, yeah, a subscription model for a game like WoW or Final Fantasy XI or Final Fantasy XIV was viable, well, that's it. I mean, they're not going to stop.
I mean, look at GTA. GTA 5 has not... I mean, I think Rockstar is finally doing a sixth one, but, like, that game came out almost 10 years ago. 10 years ago. Actually, I think it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Was it 2012?
Yeah, it was...
It was definitely... It was at least 2013. Yeah, okay, so that game is over 10 years old. And it's a game that they could just constantly update, make new changes to. Nobody cares about single player in GTA anymore. They don't have to.
Yeah, it was GTA Online that did it.
Exactly. So you can sit there and complain all day long about, like, where's the new game? But did you keep supporting the online mode? Yeah. And one day, I don't know when, obviously, GTA 5 is unique. It is literally the most sold game in human history.
I mean, it got re-released on the PS4 and Xbox One, and now I think it got re-released again on PS5.
It did, and Xbox Series X. Yep, it did.
That's baffling to me, but okay.
Well, it happened. That happened to Skyrim.
That's true. Well, I mean,
yeah, but that's the same situation with a slight difference, and I guess that's kind of interesting to explore. Each one of those games has not had a sequel in over 10 years. In fact, Skyrim's case, it's like 13 years now.
Skyrim is weird because Skyrim is still a single player game.
That's where I'm going with this. That game is entirely offline. I remember when I first saw that game and everybody was talking about it, I just assumed based on its nature that it was some giant online game, and I was stunned to find out that it wasn't. I mean, that was, I think I found that out like back in 2011 or whatever it was. Yeah, so it's 11 years ago that game came out, and I was just stunned by that. But Skyrim was still able to make money because they essentially just re-released it on every system under the sun, with the exception of the Wii U, really. But GTA Online, they have no great incentive to make a new one, even though obviously they will. But one day, and I don't know when, this is where I was going with this, it is literally the most successful game of all time. So the servers on that thing will probably function for quite some time, but there will come a day where that all gets shut down, possibly for the same Overwatch-like reasons, where they're, granted it's a slightly different situation because they're not going to override your GTA data, but they'll simply say like, no, you can't do this anymore. You got to have GTA 6 online. That is inevitable because they won't want people to continue to support the old one when they were ready for the new one. It will take a transition phase. It will always exist. But then, ironically, with GTA, we'll come right back around to it only having that single-player mode at some point, where Skyrim will just keep being the same game forever.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I don't get why Elder Scrolls 6, I know it's been announced, I just don't know any details on it. On one hand, I don't know why they did that. On the other hand, they did come out with Fallout 4, and they are coming out with Starfield. So it's not like Bethesda's not making open-world RPG games.
So they announced it to satisfy shareholders. You have to remember, that was announced. I was in the room when that was announced at E3 at Bethesda's showcase. That was so long ago, Microsoft didn't own them yet. Think about that. That's when that happened. Yeah, that's how long ago that was announced. Microsoft didn't even own Bethesda yet. So the common theory is that they announced it to up their stock value because I think they intended to be sold to Microsoft, and that would make the sale more valuable.
Yeah.
And it obviously did eventually go through. Unlike the Activision one, which looks like it's going to get blocked, that one did go through and is happening, or already happened, I should say. And the game is... I actually talked about this on my birthday live stream, and a bunch of people were telling me in that stream they're just waiting for Starfield to finish, because despite Bethesda's size, they actually don't have a whole lot of development teams. So that team is going to move over to Elder Scrolls and then more or less get to work. So
Probably.
the game has not actually had all that much development done. If you saw the original teaser, like that's anything in Unreal Engine could have made that in an afternoon, like no problem. It's just forestry and a title card. But again, it was just an announcement, kind of the way Nintendo announced Metroid Prime 4 and has shown nothing. It's the same thing.
Well, with that one, we know that they've restarted at least once.
Yeah.
Completely.
Well, in both cases, they were only announced to satisfy shareholders, no other purpose.
I really don't get why Nintendo would have needed to do that. It's not like Metroid was all that.
Think about where Nintendo was when they made that announcement, dude. The Wii U was still like their system. It's been that long.
That's true. The Switch just came out.
The Switch had just come out. Remember that when the Switch came out, a lot of people thought it wasn't going to be a success, including developers. The system launched with 5 games, and one of them was a Skylanders game. Think about that. Nobody was really all that confident in Nintendo after the debacle that was the Wii U financially. And so that was one of those moves to kind of bolster their shares, bolster some interest, even though they had nothing to show for it. This is a different situation, at least with Bethesda and Skyrim, although we're kind of going down a different road since this isn't the subject. But
yeah.
The point is, those games, whenever they actually do exist, or let's focus on Skyrim because it does exist, Skyrim... it has been updated. They've added, better textures, better resolution, 4K, all that sort of stuff. I think there's even, I could be wrong about this, but I swear they added new DLC in like the 10th anniversary edition or something like that. I honestly don't remember. I just kind of vaguely recall that, like Beyond Dawnguard and all those other ones that they put out. I think they actually added a new one.
Yeah, I never played Skyrim, so I have no idea.
Yeah, it's been a minute, but like I think that the 10th anniversary edition added new DLC, but I could be wrong on that. But those kind of upgrades, the game will still ultimately exist and work and be essentially the same experience that you remember from when you were a kid or when you first played it, whatever it is. I guess I'm just saying with all of this, I feel for the people who basically back a lot of these online games, not understanding that experience is extremely temporary. If you understand the experience is temporary, again, much like going to a sporting event, that's cool. I got no issue with that. I just feel for the people who just, I guess, don't know any better, and they essentially get taken. That's all. The retro gamer in me who likes the idea of revisiting any game I want whenever I want does not like the idea that a corporate overlord can take that game away from me. That's really how it is.
Like, I'm not as, like, hardcore against, like, digital stuff as you are, but obviously I bought a Steam Deck, and I game a lot on PC. But, like, yeah, I get the same, I get the same sentiment. Like, at least with, like, say, for the most part, like, now with, like, I mean, granted, this is going off of just digital games instead of just online-focused games again, but I actually, like, stopped buying most stuff digitally on, like, PS4 when that came out, once it got to the point where it was like, okay, well, now we have to install from the disk and we have to read from the hard drive anyway. It's like, so there's literally no difference between a downloaded version and a disk version, except for the part where I could resell the disk version if I hate the game.
Precisely.
Well, I'm unless if it's like on like sale for like 90% off or something, or if the disc is ridiculously expensive, I'm not buying anything digitally on Sony's console.
Yeah. Or if I guess you can make the case if it's exclusive digitally for whatever reason.
I mean, yeah, that's different. But
yeah, that's yeah. But even that's not even what I'm talking about here. This is literally just about games that require internet access to function, and that's unfortunate. But hey, it is what it is. So, do you have anything else to add on this?
I mean, not really. We covered most of it. The only thing I could really say is that the fact that like these online games, like MMOs, like have stories and stuff that once the game's done and gone, well, you're not going to get to experience that anymore. Like when Final Fantasy like 14 finally like ends and stops being supported, which who knows when that will actually happen, because Square Enix is still supporting Final Fantasy 11 when 14 exists. But like, from what my understanding and from watching a couple of like playthroughs and stuff on it, of some parts of it online, that basically has a full-fledged Final Fantasy story in it. And once Final Fantasy XIV eventually stops having its servers running, the only way you're going to actually be able to experience that is via people playing it, who played it and recorded it and uploaded it to YouTube. And that's really... The fact that people won't be able to go back and play any of these games once they're done just sucks.
Yep, I think we're both kind of in agreement on all that. So, I guess we'll move on to the next one. Thank you very much to Spencer Puryear for that subject. The next subject comes from an infrequent Patreon backer. Well, he's been a Patreon backer for a long time, but he every once in a while just shows up and decides to give us a subject. That would be in my Discord, our Irish friend, Miria Lucky O'Charms. That's what he goes by. That's his name. And the subject he wanted to talk about, he said, can stereoscopic 3D games make a comeback with the success of Avatar 2 or potential success of Avatar 2? Is there a space for it in 2023 with VR out there? Were there any 3D games that you guys enjoyed? Do you want to take a first stab at this?
Yeah. I will say this, that there's probably no space for, like, 3D specific games, like the 3D movie type, like the stereoscopic 3D. There's probably no place in the market now for games like that. Because they have to make the 3D TVs again, and those failed the first time, and Nintendo's not going to make a new 3DS. They've discontinued that. Except for one tiny fact that, at least for the PSVR, you can actually watch those 3D Blu-rays through your PS4 with PSVR. So in theory, you could make a game that has that type of 3D effect in it, but it would have to be VR only. And I'm not entirely sure anyone would really want to do that when they could just make a VR game, since you would need to have the headset anyway.
So, in short, I'm with you. Can stereoscopic 3D games make a comeback with Avatar 2? No. Avatar 2 has been kind of quietly making money, but it doesn't seem to even be close to the pop culture phenomenon that was the first one. It's actually, if you believe, at the time we're recording this, it just passed $1 billion gross domestically, while James Cameron claims, hopefully facetiously, but he did actually say this, that it needs to gross $2 billion globally to break even, which, if that's true, it means even though it's grossed over $1 billion, it is the worst, film flop in history. So it would be hard to argue that it's going to revolutionize anything. Now, again, we're recording this at the tail end of December. By the end of January, when a lot of you are listening to this, the numbers on Avatar will be very different. Whether or not they success or not, I don't know. But I maintain that it doesn't really matter. Like, the whole, hey, we're going to revolutionize 3D TVs thing is kind of over. The thing with 3D, you have to understand historically, is that it does an ebbs and flows model. It comes in waves. I mean, they've been pushing 3D since the 1940s, in some way, 3D glasses, and then people get on board for the gimmick for a bit, then it goes away. Avatar was the launching pad for the last time we really did that gimmick, because it was the first time, technologically speaking, we actually had the ability to bring that into people's homes and not just in a fancy theater like at MGM Studios at Disney World or whatever. And it was interesting. People got a kick out of it, and Hollywood learned all the wrong lessons, assuming that Avatar was only successful because of the 3D elements, which, given the plot of that movie, it's not hard to see why. But it wasn't really all that great of an experience. And like everything that is gimmicky, it fizzled out within a couple of years. Nobody really seems to care about the 3D element of Avatar 2. What I'm hearing from a lot of people is, and I saw the movie, by the way, I'm not going to spoil anything, not that there's much to spoil. The movie is very visually impressive, and that is all that it has going for it. The CGI at times actually looks like real life, which is astonishing to some extent.
So it's the sequel to Avatar, then?
Precisely the sequel to Avatar, yes. It's, I would argue, not surprisingly, the visual effects are better. It has been an additional, 13 years of development. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't, no part of me sat there and be like, man, I wish I could live in this world. I don't care. Like I didn't even see it in 3D. It meant nothing to me. The idea of paying more money for something that annoys me is never going to be there. So I personally do not think stereoscopic 3D televisions and all that is going to make any sort of comeback. As you point out very nicely, that you can still technically experience that stuff if you have something like a PSVR if you really want to, but that to me is just stunning. And then his second question to that is there any space for it in the 2023 market with VR out there? And I would say absolutely not. I mean,
unless if you're doing it via VR, but in that case,
exactly.
You're limiting your consumer base even more than VR already does.
Yeah, you're the niche of a niche. You know what I mean? Like, VR is never going to be, at least in our lifetimes, unless something radically changes, VR is never going to be this, completely game-changing thing that I think Sony has been betting on ever since, believe it or not, all the way back to the Wii. Wii was, they were kind of hoping for those type of numbers with some attempt at VR. We saw their very earliest attempt with the PS3 Move and that webcam and all that, but then they wanted to go bigger, so they did the actual PSVR, which didn't really do all that well. I mean,
I have one. It was great to fool around with when I had it. I even got the Oculus Quest 2 back when Facebook was still called Facebook, but that was neater because you don't need to be tethered to a big bulky machine.
Right. So I mean, if you're debating the different versions of VR, yeah, it was the most consumer friendly version. Mm-hmm. But marketing wise, let me ask you a question. Do you consider the Sega CD a big success?
Usually I would say no, but it really depends on what it was actually meant to do back then. I don't actually remember specifically what they were hoping for.
Basically, kick the Super Nintendo to the curb.
Well, then no, obviously, because the Super Nintendo
right. Okay,
had
so
a comeback. But
the reason I ask that is I remember getting in a debate about this with somebody who, he wasn't exactly unbiased. His name was something like PS4 Wins or something like that. But he was basically making the case that VR is what's special about the PlayStation and it will be very successful and it sells so much and blah, 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 and talking about all the units. And I was like, okay. So I crunched the numbers at the time, so I don't remember all of them offhand. But basically, the Sega CD sold something like 2 million units, where the Sega Genesis sold something, I don't remember again offhand, but let's say it was something like 35 million units. So the percentage of people that got on board was, I don't even know, 4% or something like that. It wasn't particularly big. But the PS4 sold 100 million units. And the PSVR base only sold 1.5 million or 2 million units. It actually sold less than the Sega CD. But had a substantially bigger potential base because of how many PS4s were out there. So if you simply crunch the numbers, 1% of the PS4 base. I don't have all the numbers in front of me, and I'm acting off of something I did a few years ago. You could sit down with all these numbers and crunch them for yourselves, but not only did the Sega CD sell more units on a 1-to-1 basis, but it actually sold more per, shall we say, capita of how many Genesis versus PS4s exist. In other words, the install base was very small on the PS4. So it's hard to argue that the PS4's VR was a success when we have to argue the Sega CD was not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it also depends on what we're considering for success.
Again, what were the goals?
It's entirely possible both of those actually, still made a profit and would technically be successful, but...
I'm not saying they didn't make a profit. I'm saying, what their intended goals were. Now, I do not think that Sega CD revolutionized the gaming industry, even though it was neat. Not everybody bought one. It did not do that. The PSVR did not exactly dominate the gaming sphere. We just talked about the numbers. It has a 1% install base. That's
once the Oculus Quest 2 came out, PSVR was no longer going to be the leader, what was no longer had any chance of being the leader of VR or being what made VR, what would make VR work, because you still need a PS4 for it. So it's still like for someone who doesn't already have a PS4. Well, then it's a $800 purchase.
Precisely. And if you're going to put down the $800, you might as well, if you're truly agnostic about where you get your VR experience, you would have to go into it knowing the PSVR is probably the worst one. I mean, granted, you need more powerful rigs and you have to spend more money, but I guess I'm saying the hypothetical scenario of somebody who's like, I want a gaming device specifically for VR, which is a very weird starting point, because I would argue that's probably almost never the case.
Nah.
Usually it's people who already have gaming, peripherals and consoles or computers, etc., wanting to add VR, not the other direction. But if you are that random hypothetical person, chances are you're also like, well, I'm not going to invest in the crappiest one if that's the thing I want is VR specifically. You're going to actually put down real money. So the PSVR was not a flop. I'm not making that case here. Same with the Sega CD, was not actually a flop. It actually was, I think it still is technically the largest selling add-on in history for a game console, even though it's still perceived as a flop, which should tell you something. I don't think that, and that was at the height of the VR craze in the post-Avatar world. We don't live in that anymore. Like, I know Sony is still kind of pushing for VR. There's going to be a PSVR 2, right? Like for PS5.
But Sony completely fucked up with that, though, because it's not, the PSVR 2 is not going to be backwards compatible with PSVR 1 games.
Great, so it's even more useless.
Yeah,
that's okay. So that's obviously a thing. That's separate, whatever. But I don't see it, man. Like, I don't see this ever making any sort of comeback. And essentially, the best you can do is try to replicate the success of Avatar. And we're living in that moment, and no one's doing this. Nobody is demanding 3D TVs. It's not a thing.
Why would they? 3D movies have still been around in theaters this entire time, even when the home thing died. Like,
right.
Avatar 2 would not kickstart it again because they never went away.
Exactly. So the same, I guess what I'm saying is the energy that created that whole trend doesn't really exist anymore. I think that PSVR was a culmination of the Avatar success and the Nintendo Wii success kind of coming to a head. And it's that's long gone, man. Like, the fact that the PSVR 2 is even coming out eventually is something. I guess that's a little surprising. It will give them something theoretically unique, but nobody really cared about it the first time. I just don't see how that's going to be any better. At least Microsoft had the good sense to be like, look, we had our gimmick. It was called the Kinect. Everyone hated it. They were celebrating us when we got rid of it. That's probably a sign. As far as I know, they completely abandoned the HoloLens. I think the U.S. military bought some of those, but that's it.
Yeah, Microsoft, Microsoft, they'll just throw money at whatever gaming-wise, and if something good comes out, yay. If not, then oh well. We blew about a couple of $1 million. No big deal.
Yeah,
like Sony, I think at this point is like, well, the PSVR is the main differentiator of our console at this point. So they're like, we have to keep going with PSVR 2 because otherwise we'll just have the big game. We'll just have a game console, which could still work, but at the same time, like, unless if things have changed in the last month. Pretty sure Game Pass is still kicking the PS Plus Extra / Ultimate / whatever, the one that basically copied Game Pass's ass. So,
yeah.
Like, and, I mean, if the Quest 2 didn't exist, like, maybe I could see PSVR being the successful one because of everything, but, I mean, the Quest 2 exists. So that, like, basically, unfortunately, means Facebook wins. Whatever there is to actually win in VR.
Yeah.
Unless if, like, their whole metaverse thing actually, like, bankrupts them, which, considering how Elon Musk is handling Twitter, I mean, it's entirely possible. But
The only VR. All right, so the next question on that though is: were there any 3D games we enjoyed? I will only argue that I kind of enjoyed playing some Virtual Boy stuff, but outside of that, no.
Well, the fact I'm going to say this one probably shows just how much of a non-starter the whole 3D effect on the 3DS and basically in general was. Super Mario 3D Land. That's the only game I could think of that like actually used the 3D effect for anything other than, look, it's 3D.
What do you mean on the 3DS?
On the 3DS, yeah.
Okay.
That was basically the only game that like actually used the 3D effect to actually affect a gameplay that I could remember. Like puzzles, there were like some puzzles or some platforming things where you have to actually turn the 3D on in order to actually see how the platform was. But other than that, I mean, everything else I remember is like, oh, cool, yeah, this is the same game I could play not in 3D, but with a 3D effect on it, so some stuff is a little bit further away, it looks like. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, unless we're including the Virtual Boy, which even then is a very limited scope, then I have no. The answer would be no. I didn't enjoy any 3D games. I mean, the only time I actually kind of did, and this is a very different context, was, and this is going to be something that very few people listening to this are going to understand, but did you ever hear of or possibly attend Disney Quest like 20 years ago?
No.
No idea what I'm even talking about, do you?
No.
That's fine. I don't. Most people wouldn't. So Disney Quest was an attempt by Disney to build digital theme parks in specific locations. So the idea was to put them into major markets where they can't possibly build. Like the reason you put a theme park in like Southern California or Orlando is that it can be open all year long. That's basically the long story short with that. You can't put a theme park in New York City, no matter how much money you throw at it, because 6 months out of the year it's going to be closed for weather reasons. So they decided to try this attempt at a digital version called Disney Quest. They built 2 locations. One was in Orlando, just because it's Disney Mecca, and the other was actually Chicago. Hence, I used to go to it. For 1 year, this digital theme park existed, and it was interesting to go in there because they had all these arcade games made by Sega. They had all these like VR things. It was insane. Like they actually had, before the Dreamcast even launched, they had like a full version of Alien Front Online. Like they would give you this VR helmet and like you'd stand in this rig and you'd have this gun and you'd basically play with like 16 other people that were all there to play. And that was cool. That type of 3D experience was amazing, but I was also like 12 at the time. So that's got to play a small part in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's outside of that type of thing where it's like a true giant big budget arcade experience, like VR experience, I've never really enjoyed any of it. I just find it gimmicky and annoying. Like the last time I think I actually tried to play anything like that is, funny enough, I was actually playing Skyrim, the PS4 VR edition. And I tried to do that, and within like 10 minutes I was on the verge of throwing up. Like I'm one of those people where I just can't really do VR without getting sick. Yeah, I didn't used to be, but maybe it's something that happened to me as I got older. I don't know. Ironically, I don't have that problem playing the Virtual Boy. So the Virtual Boy, I'm sad to say,
because your brain is not thinking that you're actually moving or controlling whatever you're controlling.
Yeah. So while I understand there are like pills and things you can take that make that experience a little bit cleaner and easier or whatever, I shouldn't have to medicate to play a video game. I'm just going to be honest.
Yeah, like there's no video game that's worth medicating yourself to actually be able to play it. It's just, no.
Yeah, so basically, to answer this question, no, there really are no 3D games I enjoyed outside of these like microscopic examples that are incredibly unique. Best 3D game I ever played, probably Jack Bros on Virtual Boy. So, anything else you want to say on this, or are we done?
I think we're done.
All right, well, then thank you very much to me real lucky o charms for that subject. And Joseph, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And we are back. What's up? We've got Keith now with us. How you doing, dude?
Hey, man, I'm doing real good. Excited, had a great holiday and all that jazz.
Awesome. So it's funny, we don't usually have this kind of situation on the podcast because it's not really a news podcast, but we actually had some breaking news sort of happen just now, which you don't know anything about this, so I'm not trying to keep you out of the loop. But earlier we were talking about the Ninja Turtles collection for the Dreamcast that was made. Literally while we were recording this, there was an update to that, so anybody listening who heard that part, there's an updated version that has just dropped that actually contains Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Re-Revenge, which is a Sega Genesis like D-make of the .mu Shredder's Revenge game. So you can now play that on the Dreamcast too, which is kind of cool, even though it's not exactly the same game. I just thought we would point that out. So that's all with that. Now, Keith.
Yes.
There was a big movie that happened recently that
it was very, very important. It had blue people in it, right?
It did. Everybody wants us to talk about the Blue People movie, and so when I went to you and I said, "How about the Blue People movie?" What did you say?
I said, if I'm going to see it, maybe, but I plan on not really seeing it because I don't want to go to the theater and sit there for 3 hours.
Yeah. So here's the thing. We're going to be talking about. I'm just going to spoil it. We're going to be talking about Black Adam. We're not going to be talking about Avatar 2. But all I'll say is I did see Avatar 2, and the super short version of this. There is a line in that movie. So the name of the movie is Avatar: The Way of Water. There is a line repeated in that movie a couple times that says the way of water is to have no beginning and no end. And I think that quote perfectly describes the film itself. And that's about all you need to know.
So you're telling me it didn't have much of a story or whatnot? What?
If you saw the first one, you saw the second one. And if you saw the first one, or even if you didn't see the first, you probably saw Pocahontas or Dances with Wolves. And it's the same movie. Basically, I can't say I disliked it, but I also didn't particularly enjoy it. I mean, the one thing it has going for it, which is the same thing everyone says, is the visuals, which makes sense. James Cameron's been working on it for 13 years. You know, the movie, to its credit, it actually made a lot of the CGI pass as reality, and I give it props for that. That stuff was impressive, but I'm sorry if I'm old school here. I'm not going to a movie for a show of lights. You know, I want an interesting story told to me. This is not even close to an interesting story. Not even remotely. And the fact that this is James Cameron is ever more depressing. But whatever. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I doubt I would be particularly interested in watching it again. So that's kind of the end of that. So let's talk about the movie you guys want to talk about, and we're gonna give full spoiler warnings for this, even though So just to be clear, because we actually had somebody upset at us, I guess, last month for not giving a spoiler warning, but I'm pretty sure we always do. So yeah, spoiler warning. We're gonna talk about Black Adam. Go see it before you listen to this. If you are concerned about that, we like to have very open discussions. So. Let's talk Black Adam. You obviously saw it. Why don't you go first?
Yes, this is actually something I chose to go see in theaters instead of Black Panther, surprisingly enough. This actually got me in theaters to go see it more than Black Panther did. For some reason, now I'm not going to say this is a great movie. This is a amazing film that you should go see right away. This is a subjective, if it fits your niche. If this fits what you kind of like, what you wanted, what you were expecting, you might like it. I came into this movie with a lot of stuff beforehand. I actually like The Rock a lot. I followed his career ever since WWF, when he was known, as The Rock. Actually, when he was known as Rocky Maivia, some random name they gave him a long time ago.
That is an old reference.
The Rock in particular, I follow his career, so pretty much anything he does, I kind of like no matter what. Because I know The Rock very well and stuff like that. So I got to give that before I say that I like this movie a lot. I like the hell out of Black Adam. I enjoyed the hell out of it. And I kind of want to hear what you think about it before I heap a bunch of praise you might not like on it.
Honestly, I thought it was just kind of okay. You have to understand that I didn't see this in theaters. I saw it on HBO Max. And the reason that matters is timing. When you saw it, there was still hope. Because it was going to have a sequel. It's, Henry Cavill's back as Superman. This is all going forward. When I saw it, it was all known already that none of that was happening. So the movie was, in essence, pointless. It's like a weird, not finale to the DCEU, just because they have like Aquaman 2 and stuff coming that was technically already done before they made that decision. But essentially, this is like the finale to this universe, and it just kind of falls on its face. So, I didn't hate it. It just kind of felt like it was wasting my time. And my favorite scene in the whole movie was the very brief Superman scene, which was just a cameo. That scene was actually filmed in September.
Yeah.
Well, now it's 2023 when people are listening to this. We're recording this in December of 2022.
Yeah.
And so that scene was filmed only like a couple weeks before the movie got into theaters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a big push from The Rock and Henry Cavill to get that put in there. Mainly, The Rock did a lot of pushing to get this movie made in general, from what I've heard. Like
he was cast in it like 15 years ago.
Star power he has built up in order to get this movie going.
Well, he was originally cast in it like 15 years ago.
Yeah, I've heard rumors of it as
like
far back as that. That's
he's
for
been
sure. I
wanting.
didn't know it was actual casting.
Yeah, he was casted a long time ago. There's even promotional photos of him from that era.
Wow.
This movie was in development hell for a long time. So I want to talk very openly about this. So this movie, The Rock, it's no secret, he's kind of pursued Arnold Schwarzenegger's career. Like, he's been trying to do the Arnold thing for the longest time. But The Rock, while I believe is a surprisingly good actor, like, he's actually very capable of giving you a very good performance. He is both terrible at his script selection process, because most of the movies he's in are awful or just meh at best. And secondly, he has a bunch of stupid contractual rules that really hinder his movies. Have you ever heard about that?
Yeah.
Okay,
he's like writers that are actually kind of weird as well, if you've seen those.
So
if you know what that is.
No, I don't. But what I'm referring to specifically is every one of his movies has a rule that says The Rock can never lose a fight. He can only win or at least break even.
Yes,
which is
also certain ways he has to be shot and filmed as well, and also certain ways the script has to depict his culture is also in a lot of his contracts as well, by the way.
Right. And so that kind of thing is why his movies will never be good, because he can never have a flawed character. Mm-hmm. Like, he can, like,
I gotcha.
He can never have a movie like The Terminator, because if you watch this movie, you understand that he was trying to make Terminator 2. He was trying to have the unthinking killing machine that is, like, essentially reprogrammed by the innocence of a child in some sense, and becomes this, like, hero from a villain. That's the story he's kind of going for. It fails spectacularly at that goal because the story has too many meandering, unsure goals, and and the characters are mostly annoying. Other than Pierce Brosnan's character, Pierce Brosnan was great in this movie, by the way, as Dr. Fate. He was fantastic. The other, like, Justice characters, like Hawkman was, like, okay-ish. His character just kind of had to be something to physically challenge Black Adam.
Yeah, somebody had to butt heads with Black Adam physically in order for someone a way for The Rock to be tougher than someone. It's got to be
right. So that, and then the other two characters were just, I honestly thought were kind of unnecessary. Like that, or they had a bunch of scenes that were cut that made them unnecessary. Like the I don't even remember his name. The guy who becomes big and small and stuff.
Yeah, that's the Atom, and the girl was Will-o'-the-Wisp or something like that, I think.
Yeah, those characters really didn't even need to be in the movie, to be completely honest.
At least the Atom has some kind of connection to me. I don't know what the heck this Will-o'-the-Wisp character is, and I'm a pretty damn good person with the comic book knowledge and whatnot. I had no clue who that she was.
Yeah, no, so I like the little Henry Winkler cameo, even though it didn't really make a whole lot of sense. But
oh yeah, Henry Winkler, by the way, in the broken DCEU is the original Atom, by the way, atoned to as I'm sorry, the older gentleman in Ant-Man, one Douglas guys, I think.
Pym.
Yeah. It felt like they were trying to do that type of thing, but like in a joking way. It felt
Yeah,
kind of funny. It felt like
Well, I mean-
the Atom was another Ant-Man. It's in a very joking way.
Yeah, which gets a little more confusing when you have a guy named Adam and Black Adam, but that's two different words. As someone with the name Adam, every time I heard the word atom, ATOM,
Yes.
you always get stares. Trust me about that one. So that was an odd choice, but whatever. So those are kind of the side things. But the story basically meanders all over the place, and it doesn't. I mean, it's got a cartoon supervillain in it. It's like, I am literally Satan. All right, why not? To me, this felt like. I think The Rock is at his best when he is cast in movies with an ensemble around him that just kind of elevates his acting talent. You know, like, I cannot believe I'm saying this, but that Jumanji movie, the second Jumanji movie, that's his first Jumanji movie, is a far better movie than it has any right to be. Okay. But he was cast perfectly as, like, his character is a video game character who basically isn't supposed to be able to die. That's perfect casting because it works within his restraints, but then he's got people to bounce off of, like Kevin Hart and the other actors, that can kind of make it all work really well as a nice ensemble thing. The Rock as a lead is not bad, but he as an individual has too many stupid rules that really kind of tie his hands. It gives me, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it kind of gave me Space Jam 2 vibes, where, you know, like, a big part of that movie being so awful is LeBron had a whole bunch of stupid requests and demands, really, about, like, well, I have to be portrayed as, like, this super popular guy with all these, like, tons and tons of followers. It's like one of the most arrogant things I've ever seen. And it's like sometimes certain characteristics don't mix. Now, the difference is, of course, The Rock is actually a genuinely talented actor. I don't fault LeBron for not being an actor. He never claimed to be, but that's a different story. I'm just saying, like, the idea of, like, let me inject my real world concerns into my fake narrative about super universes is stupid, and it always causes problems like this. Mm-hmm. So when we go into this movie knowing there's no chance The Rock will be threatened in any way, shape, or form, not just because he is the character of Black Adam, but because the actor is unwilling to portray himself as any sort of failure, what is the point of this? Like a Black Adam versus Superman movie, which we're now not getting, how was that movie going to work?
I was going to ask that, yes.
Like, so The Rock's going to be like, okay, I have to defeat Superman?
How is that going to work?
That was never going to work.
He has to drop on the mat, man, and he has to take the fall for Superman.
I'll tell you exactly how that movie would have worked if they had ever made it. They would have fought, like, once in a tussle. Superman probably would have, like, somewhat lost the first fight. Then they would have had a bigger tussle where Black Adam sort of loses the second fight. And then the third time, when they were going to go head-to-head, they would end up teaming up because they're going to have to take on Darkseid or something like that. I guarantee you that's how they would have done that. Because he can't lose a fight. He can only win it or at least draw in neutrality. With a restriction like that, you can never win. Imagine if Schwarzenegger had that same restriction with T2. Well, at the end of T2, the Terminator can't die. He wins. Well, the whole point is that all the Terminators have to be eliminated. How could you do that? You model the dude's career, but then you didn't learn one of the core lessons. Like, Schwarzenegger has had a character, like a version of himself, die or fail many times in his films because it works. What's more important is the story, not your personal image on screen.
Schwarzenegger has picked the right things in a lot of times, the right times, and has gotten relationships in Hollywood that have helped him out a lot. Because you got to think about Schwarzenegger's comedy roles and how those, a lot of people, don't think much about those, but they're kind of fun to watch. And so a lot of those came from Danny DeVito, from his relationship with Danny DeVito. And his relationship in Hollywood is much more positive. He forgot to take that tone, I guess, right? What kills me
about The Rock is that he is actually very good at comedy. He's actually very good. He's a very good actor. He's very talented in all these ways. It's literally this stupid restriction that he's like, well, I can never be harmed or any of that stuff. I can't have flaws. It's like, okay, well, your characters will never be interesting unless we very specifically craft the tone around you. Again, Jumanji's a prime example of that. He is literally a video game character that's supposed to be indestructible. That's like the whole point. That's why that works. But that's a very unique situation. You can't write that too many times. So that's why he tends to end up in a lot of these movies.
And in this particular case, in this movie, Black Adam because The Rock is who he is. By the way, the only villain that can stop Black Adam is Black Adam. Because a lot of the struggle The Rock has, only villain he seems to have is himself. His own issues with his brooding self. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't even know where else to focus on this, because it feels like, if I'm honest, dude, it feels like a pointless discussion almost, because we know the DCU is dead now. So,
yeah.
So
your point totally hit home, and I'm sorry about that, because I did have hope. Because I did see this when there was still news. At the time when I saw this, the news of Henry Cavill giving up The Witcher to be Superman again was going, and news of scripts coming out was coming out. You know, I had hope in my eyes, and it really does change this movie. It really does change it. Because now thinking about it and thinking that the DCEU is gone and dead, and they were not getting what I thought was good from this movie anymore, it's kind of, what's the point of it? What's the point of the movie?
So that means with that gone, the promise of sequels that will be more interesting, that will now never exist, we can only judge this movie on the face value of what's actually there.
All right.
And the truth is, there isn't a whole lot there.
Nope.
There's too many elements that are just too stupid. Like, you have, the one thing I actually thought narratively about this movie that was actually pretty good was the idea that they set it up like Black Adam was a fallen, chosen, the wizards had chosen him, and he had just kind of been corrupted, and he's like the evil one, unlike Shazam and the other characters that, are noble. They set it up like he was a fallen one, but it turns out, in reality, he wasn't the chosen one at all. He was given his powers by his son temporarily to heal his wounds, and then his son died in that temporary process, which made him this... He was never selected, and the wizards, had to fix that. Now, why... I guess I don't know enough about the Shazam character, but I didn't know he could just give his powers to other people.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that. In the comic book, storyline and whatnot, it's a whole different situation. It's like a whole nother wizard giving Black Adam his powers, a wizard who's a rival to the Wizard of Shazam. So it's a whole different situation. I guess they didn't want... Again, the Rock wanted connection to the good power, not the bad power, I guess. Maybe that's why they changed it. But no, the power is only one person, one chosen one, and only the chosen one could split up his powers amongst other people's.
So, in essence, they screwed that up.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing they got right was like the Shazam kids. I mean, the Shazam
well, they weren't even in this. They weren't even in
Shazam
this. I'm talking about just Black Adam.
Was another shining light that they had in the DCEU, because that was actually an entertaining film.
I agree with that. But and it's also weird that Shazam is never mentioned or referenced in any way, other than that one actor, the guy who played the wizard, is the same wizard in both movies.
Yeah, Damon Houston.
That guy whose name I can't pronounce, but we both know who we're talking about.
Yes, sir.
He was in Guardians of the Galaxy, obviously Marvel, but different.
He's been in a lot of stuff all the way going
back. He's in
a
lot of things. Yeah, he's in a lot of things. He's a good guy, good actor.
Fantastic.
But my point is, like, aside from him, and of course the phrase Shazam, there is no connection to the actual Shazam movie, which is strange.
Yeah.
But whatever, that's DCEU just doing what it does. But yeah, as you point out, so he didn't get his powers from the comic book way of a dark wizard, nor did he get it from Shazam cloning himself or anything like that. He got it from his son being chosen by the good wizards and then just giving him the powers, which, as I understand it, you can't actually do. Which, by the way, if he can, that means that, what is this, Billy Botsworth? Is that the character's name?
Billy Batson.
Billy Batson, sorry.
Yeah.
That character, the other Shazam, the real Shazam.
Yeah.
Theoretically, that means he can do that too.
Yeah, you keep the way it works isn't like that. You split the power. You don't because the power is different sections of heroes. You got the strength of Hercules, the knowledge of Solomon, and stuff like that. You can separate the power, but no matter what, the kid would have had some power left. He can't give it all away.
Right.
He's not the wizard.
Right. So that's the part that threw me off. Unless he did clone himself or clone the power and then de-Shazammed and happened to die in that moment, I guess. But the movie intentionally is vague about that. Yeah. So if you separate, shall we say, my DC knowledge from that plot line, then I find the plot line interesting because it's essentially the role reversal. I actually genuinely didn't see that coming, and I thought that was pretty interesting. It's just that it doesn't work with the larger DC tapestry of events, but since we're now kind of saying ad nauseum that doesn't even matter because they're never going to do another one, who even cares? So when the best part about it is a flaw, that's not a good sign. But like, I did not like that we had two magic sources. You've got the Shazam stuff, which in my opinion didn't get enough exposure. I think it was like they were expecting us to have seen Shazam while also not really offering much of any connection to the actual film. Meanwhile, they also have, what's that? Is it Eternium, or what's the material, the metal?
Oh! They made up another fake metal. Oh, is it Nif metal?
I don't remember what it's called. I want to say it's something like Eternium, but I could definitely be wrong about that. Anyway, so they, in this place, this terrible fake country they live in, Kondarak or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's like Kondak or something. Yeah,
Kondarak, something like that. They have this kind of like in Marvel. You got Wakanda, and they have vibranium or adamantium.
It very much it looked like they were trying to parallel that. Yes.
Right, so they can have this metal that can just kind of do anything. So I guess this society at one time started mining that stuff, although it was a very rare metal, like very, very rare. And so the idea was that once you built like a crown out of it, then you could basically like become Satan or something.
Yeah, you could like rule the world, yeah.
Yeah, Black Adam stopped it the first time by being overzealous in his murder. Okay. Then Black Adam was basically, by the Wizards, was just kind of put into a prison, and for some reason that crown was just like next to him for like thousands of years, and nobody ever found it or found him. Which, I have a huge issue with archaeological movies where they just kind of find things right away. Like, it's one thing for an Indiana Jones for the entire movie to be about like, we need to find the Ark of the Covenant, and they track down clues, and they're like doing a whole thing. This movie basically starts with like, we have this god that we believe in, and rumor has it he's like in that cave, and we've never bothered to like go in there and look. Like, the characters barely do anything to find him. They just kind of walk in there, and they're like, oh look, it's the Shazam cave, we're here. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
I hate when movies do that. So it's like, and both of these magical artifacts are just like next to each other, and it kicks off the entire event. And yeah, then you have a scene, of course, of Black Adam just like murdering everybody, which it works if we're supposed to take this as like a comedy where these guys are just bad guys. But I don't know, it's the movie has like two lessons it's trying to teach at the same time. It's trying to go for like, haha, it's funny he's killing all these guys. Well, it's also trying to do the Terminator 2 thing of like, you can't just go around killing people. So it's like, well, which is it? Which one do you want me to take away from this? You're glorifying him murdering a bunch of people and then also saying it's bad that he's murdering people.
No, they were going for, you got to murder the right people. I think that's what they were trying to do. It's like, no, you can't murder him. You got to murder the right guy.
That's a really weird lesson.
Yeah, I don't know. It didn't seem like they were doing that lesson.
No,
so he's going around, he's beating the shit out of people and stuff like that. So like Waller calls in the Justice Society to take him down.
She also started with like the C tier characters. Like, why would you? It's like you know what Shazam is. Uh-huh. There's no way you don't know this because he exists. You didn't send him in. You obviously have access to Superman. You didn't send him in. Dr. Fate's cool. I'll give you that. But you sent in like, you sent in two rookies.
Yeah.
Literally two of them are just rookies, and one guy is a dude in a hawk suit. You know what I mean? It's just like, it
actually is what it is. Hawkman is just a dude in a hawk suit. He's a reincarnated Egyptian pharaoh, or Egyptian dude.
That's actually more than like say Falcon from Marvel.
But
and stuff.
Also, I gotta hit this point real quick because of I want to say with Hawkman, most people, if you are a fan of Hawkman and the character, you're gonna be very disappointed because they tell you jack shit about the character. They don't even mention that he's an old character from Egypt or anything like that, or that if he dies, don't worry, he's gonna be coming back. Or he never mentions his wife, which is the sole purpose of him coming back in the first fucking place. The reason why he comes back every single time. But whatever. A little small rant. ladies and
Sure,
gentlemen.
sure.
They fucked up Hawkman pretty good, but I will not take away. I did like his portrayal. The actor was fine. I thought the actor did a good job with what he had, and which wasn't much.
So I don't know much about that character, but thank you for filling me in on that. But that sounds like it sounds like he has like 1,000-year-old origins. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Goes dating all the way back to Egypt. He's a reincarnated.
Right.
Basically, he gets reincarnated. Basically, he was a Romeo and Juliet type of situation. He hooks up with his Shaira, his hawk girl, and they get betrayed by some dude who puts a curse on them that they're always supposed to fall in love and die. So they get reincarnated, they fall in love, they die. Reincarnated, fall in love, die. And Hawkman is the current iteration of one of them. And Hawkgirl is usually the other one.
All right, so that is an incredibly fertile foundation for a relation, for a foundation between him and Black Adam.
I thought
because they theoretically could have both been around for thousands of years doing this endless dance. Like maybe even one of the last times that he and his woman died was at the hands of Black Adam.
Yes, very possible. Very possible. But they could have been there at that time. Very possible.
There is
also.
I
mean, they don't even bring that. Most of the conflict between Black Adam and Hawkman is just who's stronger. I'm stronger. I could take you out. I could take you out. That's pretty much most of their conflict. Whereas they could have added that stuff, like you said, that awesome, amazing history.
Like I said, I think that's the big problem. Is it's the writing, and it's the writing because of the restrictions The Rock puts on stuff, and I don't think he does it maliciously. It's not like he's standing out to be like, I want a badly written movie. I think he just doesn't know what a good script is. I think he just sees a good script is one where I'm like indestructible, and we're just gonna have big fight scenes. Do you remember the movie The Rundown? Rundown. Walking Tall.
I do remember The Rundown.
Walking Tall.
Walking Tall when he comes back to his hometown, he's got to take out the casino, right?
Yes, and he has he beating people down with like a 2x4. That movie.
He's like indestructible. That one.
Right, that movie. It was very early in his I'm not doing wrestling anymore. I'm an actor now career, and I remember him being on a late night show. I don't know if it was Conan or one of those. And they were asking him about the movie, and he basically said, I like movies where you don't have to think. All you got to do is just watch me beat stuff up. I genuinely think that mentality has completely seeded into his script approval phase, because he just looked at it as this is a movie where I just beat stuff up. Who cares why I know Hawkman? I'm just a guy I'm going to punch around. Who cares what his story is? The problem is that is what we don't like. We're not engaged with these characters because we have no reason to be. And I'm not entertained by cartoon CGI effects of him killing a bunch of people because I'm not 12 years old. Do you know what I mean? I need more substance to this. And so if you're telling me I have to care about this universe, you got to give me a reason to. And I think, honestly, I feel like The Rock is really just getting in his own way here. If he had the foresight to just let script writers do what they're supposed to do to tell dramatic stories, and he just participated and did his role as the actor, he'd be in much better movies. But he doesn't do that. He feels the need that I got to interject my thoughts into this because my version of a good movie is one where I'm awesome and I kick everybody's ass, and that's the movie.
Dude, have you seen Hobbs and Shaw?
I think I saw it once, but I barely remember it.
Okay, when his Samoan family is able to, using just basic hand weapons, take on an entire fully fledged army with modern weapons.
Mm-hmm.
That it's just insane, the scene that they pull off there. It's these guys have guns. How are they fucking doing this shit? And dudes are jumping off each other, doing WWE moves and stuff like that. And other wrestlers are actually in it. Other wrestlers that are part of his family. Surprisingly enough.
I guess I don't remember that too well.
It's ridiculous. Right when you said he interjects his own stuff, that scene popped in my head. Like crazy. If you interject too much of that stuff in there, we're seeing that and not a movie. And I'm not paying for that. I'm paying for a movie.
Yeah. So it's funny because his best examples are the ones where he kind of ignores that. So the oddly enough, I think it's maybe I'm misremembering the title. I'm pretty sure there was a Will Ferrell movie called The Other Guys, which was both him
and Samuel L.
and Mark
Jackson,
Wahlberg. No, him and Mark Wahlberg.
No. It's The Rock and Samuel L. Jackson playing the two.
No, okay, so that's where I was getting to it. The leads of the movie are Will Ferrell. The leads of it are Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg, and the idea is they work in like a spy agency or something like that, but they work in like behind a desk. They're just kind of paper pusher type of dudes who keep the place running. And the two big guards out there, the two James Bonds as it were, is like Samuel L. Jackson, as you said, and The Rock. And they're like the awesome agents that everyone aspires to, because these are the guys that go take down, like, it's like a cartoon agency. Like, they go in and they just crush everybody and they take down an entire nation or whatever. But in that movie, those two characters are on a mission and they just get killed. Like, The Rock, actually, his character dies in that movie. And by far the funniest scene in that whole movie. And so the other guys, the premise is, okay, well, our two good guys are dead. All we have left is Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell. The movie itself isn't that good. But the fact that he was, like, willing to, kill himself in that movie made for the best moment of that film. And I just wish that he would open himself up to more stuff like that, where he was willing to be like flawed. Because you realize in this movie, they never defeat him. All that really happens is he has that scene with the crown and the kid where he thinks, I don't know why he did this. Like, he jumps in there and saves the kid. And then as soon as that scene's over, he's like, I guess I don't want to be Black Adam anymore because my son died a long time ago, which would have made some sense if he had built a better relationship with that kid and that kid died or lost a limb or something significant happened, but he was totally fine. Like, nothing happened to him. So for no reason, The Rock's like, you know what? The movie has to progress, so I'll just de-Shazamify. And then he agrees willingly to just go to prison and not participate. And then they have to let him out because they have to take on like a demon god. And rather than fight the demon god with things like Superman or Shazam that are trusted in, like superheroes in this universe, no, let's release a prisoner who is a psychotic murderer to deal with it.
Yeah, of course.
That's what the movie does. Like, it's just baffling to me. And then again, that's one of those problems where you when you depend upon a cinematic universe, you run into those, well, where are those characters and why aren't they dealing with it? But I think it's perfectly fair to ask where Shazam and Superman are, considering one of them is straight up in the film, and the other one is, this environment cannot exist without Shazam, so it's pretty fair to ask where he is.
Actually,
right?
Probably one of the best parts of the series Peacemaker is the fact that Peacemaker is asking Amanda Waller's people that question the entire freaking movie. The entire series. He's like, yeah, this seems kind of serious. Can we call the Justice League now? Yeah, can we call maybe Superman? I don't know. It seems like obvious question. It's like, well, it's very obvious answer. They don't have access to the actors and whatnot because that'd be way too much fucking shit for them to deal with. They don't have easy cameos to pull in like Marvel did. They just don't have that ability.
Right, and I think that that's the best way to approach it. If you're going to do this big cinematic universe that's going to have these obvious questions, you have to approach it like that, where you just kind of make jokes out of the fact. You can't just ignore it. That's stupid. I mean, you have to at least address it. And those are the two most egregious examples. Like, I understand why Batman's not there dealing with that, but Superman is literally in the movie. It is hard to ask, well, okay, why didn't he go there to deal with the giant demon god thing? Why did we have to release a known, like, murderer terrorist like to do this, and not even like in a Suicide Squad way? Anyway, so
why do we have to send a guy who's obviously in his retirement of his superhero days after him? Yeah. Poor fucking Dr. Fate, man. Why does he have to fucking do this shit? I was thinking that the entire movie. Dr. Fate looks like the entire time during this movie, he looks like they called him up in the middle of tea and he is pissed off that he has to deal with it. That's what it seems
Isn't
like.
That just Dr. Fate in general?
Great job, though. Fantastic.
He does. He was aside from Henry Cavill's brief little cameo as Superman, Pierce Brosnan was the best part of this film.
No one's ever saying DCEU hasn't done good casting. They've done great casting. Ben Affleck did a great job as Batman. Henry Cavill is great as Superman. Gal Gadot looks and does a good job as Wonder Woman. Not Wonder Woman anymore.
I would say she looks the part. I wouldn't say she.
I was saying, look, that's what I was trying to go around. I was trying to dance around that one.
Yeah,
they had all these great castings, but they can't write a fucking script. Jesus
well,
Christ.
to be fair to them, I don't. This is gonna sound weird.
Yeah.
I don't really blame DC for this. I guarantee you, the reason this script was a cluster is because of The Rock. I mean, this was his project for
This one
15
particular,
years,
okay.
dude. And because of what we know about the way he handles those contracts, like he won't allow himself to be wounded in a film. It's like, okay, well then your character will never be interesting. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's but whatever.
It's the Superman syndrome. That's why Superman's comic books got really boring to read after a while.
But the thing is, Henry Cavill didn't come in and say, I'm not allowed to have Superman be hurt. Like, he was very willing for his character to take damage.
Oh, yeah,
you know,
he was willing to die in a movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's so he didn't have these insane demands that were like, okay, well, we can't write a movie then.
It doesn't work that way. Have me get beat up by Batman. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, exactly. So, whatever. Even though that particular film is terrible,
I do want to say this, guys. Look, it's an entertaining movie. There's a lot to put aside, but you know what? I was still very entertained by the movie if you sit down and relax for a good entertaining time. A lot more than some recent comic book movies have been for me. I mean, honestly, yeah.
I will say I wasn't bored, but I did watch it knowing it was pointless.
Yeah,
and
I had the hope, so it helped.
Yeah, that definitely was a different factor.
Yeah.
When I'm watching it, I'm like, okay, let's see how Superman or Henry Cavill's last hurrah as Superman plays out. Like, that's really the only reason I was even remotely interested, which again is why they put him there, because I think they knew that in hindsight. But the other thing I really want to talk about is this Kandar or Kandar, whatever it is, place.
Yeah.
This the fake country they are in.
Fake Wakanda, yeah.
So the basic premise in this is that this country is kind of like a pseudo Egypt, whatever, that's used to be this great empire, but then, fell or whatever. And now it's like apparently completely controlled by like marauding gangster terrorists. And so, which is insane, first of all. Second of all, it's, so then they have this point the characters make, which is like, look, where's the Justice Society for all these years? Like, we live under like terrorist occupation, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I see what you guys are doing here. You're trying to make this somewhat allegorical, but it doesn't really work when they have like flying motorcycles and things that are completely ridiculous. Like, this is not a North Korean totalitarian dictatorship type of state where you go, all right, so here's a conflict that in real world, Superman, well, okay, Superman's not real, but in comic lore, they never have Superman just go to North Korea and just like give it democracy. Like, they never do that storyline, because one of the core reasons is Superman is supposed to not really interfere with stable political situations. That's a country that made its own independent choice to function like that. So he's not going to go in there and be like, on behalf of the United States, I'm here to, kill Kim Jong-un. Like, that's not a thing. But it's pretty different when it's like, hey, we were a country and literally some terrorists came in from another country and just like murder us on sight for resources. That's not even a government. That's the closest thing you can kind of compare that to is Afghanistan, and even that's not a perfect example. I don't know. It would be like if the Yakuza just somehow invaded, Mongolia and took it over.
Yeah,
You're like,
they have intergang to it in this one, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, okay, that doesn't work. You can't. Like, you can't say that all the Justice League and the Superman, like, none of them would have interfered with that. That's pretty different than, like, a quote-unquote stable country that has existed for decades and generations that just happens to be a crappy place. Is pretty different than, like, hey, a terrorist organization came in and is just, like, a bunch of gangsters. That is something exactly like how they would go and interfere. Justice Society would be all over taking that out. Are you kidding?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no international pressure. I mean, who's pressuring them not? Oh, don't go in there and mess with a random gang causing violence and stuff like that. Nobody's saying that. The only reason we don't go in, or somebody else doesn't go into another country, is because usually pressure from other countries.
That, and we just don't want to invade a bunch of countries in reality. But like, but basically, what I'm saying is, I look at this movie and I see all the elements on paper and how they could work. And then I see all the dumb little choices they made that break that. Again, it's like the idea of a dark version of Shazam that kind of starts off, negative, but then ends up becoming a force of good, or maybe even an anti-hero, where it's like he's a force for good, but does it kind of by his own means, kind of like almost like a Lobo or something. I could see that as being interesting. The idea of this country that is under oppression and occupation and him liberating it, I think are good things. It's just the stupid manner in which those ideas are executed that make it kind of break. And it leaves me going like, well, this was pointless.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to put it. It didn't really show... I mean, in the end, what was the country's or this area's situation? Did they actually solve anything?
So they didn't until Black Adam was re-released again, and then he became, I guess, the ruler of everything because he sits in that throne at the very end. And so now he's like the ruler of the land, and basically what he's told
Oh, so he's going to be
is-
like a Dr. Doom type of guy now.
Kind of. I mean,
Okay.
he's going to give me nothing now, but if you remember what Amanda Waller says, she says, if you stay within Kandar, we won't bother you, you don't bother us. If you ever leave it, then you have an issue. And then he's like, nothing can defeat me, and that's when Superman just shows up. So the basic idea I think they were going for was stay out of my territory and we'll stay out of your territory, which doesn't make any sense, but that's... I mean, he just essentially replaced one dictatorship and became the dictator. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah, he kills the king, sits on the throne, takes the crown.
yeah, so I don't know. That movie needed like 8 more rewrites, and it needed The Rock to accept that it's okay for his character to have flaws.
Yeah.
But-
There was definitely openings and opportunities throughout.
Yeah. So whatever, I don't know. I got nothing else. I think we've kind of said our piece.
Well-
and ultimately, none of this even matters. This is the end. They're not making a sequel. The Rock walked away from this.
Yeah.
Henry Cavill is kicked out of this, and it's just DCEU is over. Like we all know that now. So this is just kind of a movie we'll look back on, like the time we're like, hey, do you remember when they did make a Phantom movie in the mid '90s with Billy Zane? This is going to be like, you remember that time they did make a Black Adam movie?
No,
Oh,
man,
that was weird.
this is that movie that's going to show up on your list when you're watching the Rock movies and you need a superhero movie to watch. Oh, yeah, that's the one. I must say about that.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So anything else you want to say about this?
Well, one small thing. Again, screwing up the Hawkman character, his mace, all of his weapons, in the comic books, they're made to repel magic. Is all I gotta say.
Okay.
It's like he should have been able to walk in and take care of this in 2 seconds, and they made him just like nothing. They just made him a guy who could fly around. But
Well,
whatever.
there you go.
He more crap.
Like I said,
more junk.
he would have been, had he been executed correctly, the perfect hero figure to go up against Black Adam's anti-hero figure, because they could have had a common origin, or at least common history, by both being thousands of years old. Again, his character could have died at the hands of Black Adam, so he knows it personally. Like, that was...
Oh my
pieces
God.
were right there. They were right
could have
there.
made Black Adam the freaking wizard that oh, fuck it. I'm sorry, man. I'm thinking about these great possibilities that could have. Whatever.
Right.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Basically, all I'm trying to say with Black Adam is it was an entertaining enough movie. I was amused a little. It was better than Avatar. I'll say that.
Okay.
But at the same time, I look at it as nothing but completely failed potential. And I think that Henry Cavill's Superman scene at the end amplifies this perfectly. It's just, hey, how cool would this be? Too bad it's not happening. Oh, well, bye. That's the movie.
Yep. Go with it,
So-
man.
Yeah. All right. Well, so that'll do it for that. Keith, thank you very much for joining me and picking that subject. Also want to give shout outs to, of course, Joseph Tamburino for joining me earlier, as well as Abdullah. Shout outs to Samuel Coxis, Chuck Shaw, Miria Luckio Charms, as well as Tim Inman, Luis Bonilla, Loke, Michael Kelly, and Trey Wagner. Thank you to all of you guys. Thank you all for listening. As always, please sign up on Patreon at any time. Get early access to this and all the other videos. I appreciate the support. You can pick subjects, you can get shout outs, and you can even be on here just like Keith. Keith, do you like being on here? Do you think it's worth it?
Absolutely. Best time of my month, man, is hanging out with Adam.
There you go. See, that's pretty cool. I appreciate that.
Yep.
So thank you guys very much for listening. Like, comment, subscribe, and of course, I'll see you all later.
Bye-bye.